Welcome to Urban American Stories. Don't forget to like, subscribe to the channel, and turn on notifications. The metallic sound of wire being tensioned echoed through the Peterson property like a dark omen that October morning. Jack Peterson, 42, was busy milking the cows in the barn when his brother Henry burst through the door panting and red-faced with rage. "They did it during the night, Jack. That woman's gone completely mad," cried Henry, his hands shaking as he clutched his worn hat against his chest. The Peterson farm, located on the outskirts of Lebanon, Kansas, had been the family home for 4 generations. Its 180 acres of fertile land represented not only their livelihood, but also a legacy built with sweat and determination since 1892, when his great-grandfather arrived from Sweden with only his suitcase of clothes and many dreams. Jack put down his milk pail and followed his brother to the southern edge of the property. What he saw made his blood boil: a newly installed electric fence cut through almost 2 acres of his most fertile land with private property Golden Plains HOA signs every few feet. Elizabeth Warren, a middle-aged woman with impeccably groomed blonde hair and a navy blue blazer that seemed out of place in the rural setting, was standing on the other side of the fence with a group of men in suits. Her artificial smile didn't reach her cold eyes when she saw the Peterson brothers approaching. "Good morning, gentlemen," she said with false cordiality. "I hope you received our notification about the property boundary correction." "What notification?" Jack asked, trying to remain calm. "The last correspondence we received from the HOA was a ridiculous fine for our tractor visually polluting the landscape." Elizabeth sighed, theatrically removing an envelope from her Italian leather briefcase. "We sent this 3 weeks ago. According to the new topographical surveys, this area belongs to the territory of the Golden Plains HOA. We're just claiming what's rightfully ours." Henry stepped forward, but Jack grabbed him by the arm. "We have the original property documents," said Henry, his voice quivering with indignation. "Our father showed us every landmark on this land, and you know very well that this fence is inside our property." The group of men behind Elizabeth moved uncomfortably, except for one, George Matthews, the developer, known for turning family farms into luxury condominiums all over the state. His predatory smile made his intentions clear. "Times have changed, Mr. Peterson," Matthews interjected, adjusting his silk tie. "Lebanon is growing, and rural areas like this need to adapt to progress. The Golden Plains HOA is offering a unique opportunity for development." Jack felt the weight of years of family history on his shoulders. He remembered his father, Richard Peterson, who had passed away the year before, teaching him about every piece of that land. "You have no right," he said firmly. "We'll sort it out legally." Elizabeth shrugged dismissively. "Do as you like. But while your lawyers spend time and money, we'll already be developing this area. The HOA board has already approved the preliminary design of the new lots." That afternoon, the Peterson brothers delved into dusty boxes in the attic of the main house, desperately searching for the property's original documents. Among old photos and yellowed letters, they found what they were looking for: the original deeds, detailed maps, and surveying records that unequivocally proved their rights to the land. "Look at this," said Henry, pointing to an annotation in the margin of one of the maps. "Dad has marked every land dispute we've faced in the last 50 years. He knew this could happen." Jack examined the documents carefully. "But there's something wrong here. Why is the HOA acting in such a hurry? Why install a fence in the middle of the night?" The answer came the next morning when they saw construction trucks parked next to the fence. George Matthews personally supervised as workers began installing for sale signs on the newly demarcated lots. "They're trying to create fait accompli," muttered Jack, watching the scene through his binoculars. "If they manage to sell the plots before we can take legal action." "We can't let that happen," Henry interrupted, his voice laden with determination. "This land isn't just property, it's our history." The brothers contacted Marion Foster, a local lawyer known for taking on corporations in defense of small landowners. When she examined the documents in her modest office in downtown Lebanon, her face lit up with interest. "This is more than a simple land dispute," said Marion, adjusting her red-framed glasses. "There's a pattern here. The Golden Plains HOA has done this on other properties in the area, always using aggressive tactics and dubious documentation. While developing their legal strategy, the Petersons discovered that they were not alone. Other landowners in the area began to come forward with similar stories. Pressure from the HOA, arbitrary fines, attempts to annex land. Elizabeth Warren isn't just the president of the HOA. Marion revealed, spreading newspaper clippings on her desk. She has connections to several real estate development companies, including Matthews Enterprises. This is a much bigger scam than it looks. The battle for the Peterson farm was just beginning, and the brothers knew they would face a long and difficult road ahead. But with the memories of their father as their guide and the determination of generations of farmers running through their veins, they were ready to fight. As the sun set over the wheat fields that afternoon, Jack and Henry stood side by side, watching the workers leave. The electric fence hummed softly, like a constant reminder of the threat hanging over their inheritance. But the Petersons were never ones to back down in the face of a challenge, and this would be just another battle in their family's long history. Marion Foster spread out a series of documents on her oak desk while Jack and Henry Peterson looked on. The modest office in downtown Lebanon was filled with files that revealed a disturbing pattern in the activities of the Golden Plains HOA. "Look at this," Marion said, pointing to a stack of complaints. "In the last 18 months, the HOA has expanded its territory by more than 300 acres, always using similar tactics. First come the excessive fines, then the allegations of code violations, and finally the annexation attempts." Jack picked up one of the documents, recognizing the name of Frank Miller, a neighbor who had sold his property 6 months earlier. Frank never mentioned any problems with the HOA. He just said he was tired of running the farm. Because he was silenced, Marion replied, rummaging through her drawer and pulling out a confidentiality agreement. The HOA offered him above-market value, but on one condition: never to discuss the terms of the sale or the circumstances that led to it. Henry clenched his fists. "So that's how they work. They wear people down until they give up." Marion nodded, her eyes shining with determination from behind her red glasses. "But you have something the others didn't: impeccable documentation and a documented family history. And now you also have evidence of bad faith on the part of the HOA." While they were discussing legal strategies, Jack's phone vibrated. It was a text message from his daughter Amanda, who was studying environmental law at the University of Kansas. "Dad, I found something interesting about Golden Plains. Can you make a video call?" Minutes later, Amanda's anxious face appeared on Marion's laptop screen. "I was researching for a paper on sustainable development when I found this," she said, sharing her screen. "Matthews Enterprises has a history of environmental violations in their developments. In 3 different cases, they started construction before obtaining the necessary permits. And guess who appears as legal counsel in 2 of those projects?" Amanda continued. "Elizabeth Warren, 5 years before she became president of the HOA. The revelation provoked a heavy silence in the room. Marion began furiously taking notes. "This establishes an earlier link between Warren and Matthews. We can use this to question the legitimacy of the HOA's decisions under his leadership." Over the next few days, the Petersons discovered that they were not alone in their struggle. Other homeowners in the area began to speak out, sharing similar stories of harassment and intimidation by the HOA. Clara Rodriguez, who owns a small ranch to the east of the Petersons' property, revealed that she had received a series of fines for too many animals on her property, even though it was within the limits allowed by rural zoning. "They want to tire us out," Clara said during an impromptu meeting in the Petersons' kitchen. "They know that small landowners don't have the resources to fight indefinitely." News of the Petersons' resistance spread quickly through the community. One evening, while Jack was checking on the animals in the barn, he found Robert Wilson, an elderly man who had sold his land to the HOA the year before, waiting in the driveway. "I should have fought like you guys are doing," Robert said, his voice laden with regret. "I have letters, emails, proof of how they manipulated the whole process. I'm willing to testify." As the base of support for the Petersons grew, Elizabeth Warren and George Matthews stepped up their tactics. New billboards appeared along the main road, promising Lebanon's future, with computerized images of luxurious homes where wheat fields now stood. Marion organized a preliminary hearing with Judge Harold Bennett, known for his firm stance against corporate abuses. During the session, Elizabeth Warren kept her composure, but her hands trembled slightly as Marion presented the evidence of previous connections between her and Matthews. "Your Honor," Marion argued, We have here a clear pattern of predatory behavior, with the HOA being used as an instrument to facilitate the commercial expansion of Matthews Enterprises. Judge Bennett examined the documents carefully, his eyebrows furrowing more and more. Ms. Warren, how do you explain these seemingly coordinated actions between the HOA and the developer? Elizabeth hesitated for a moment. It's just coincidental timing, Your Honor. Lebanon is growing, and the HOA is just trying to ensure an orderly development. Orderly development does not include fences installed at night. Marion countered, presenting nighttime photos taken by security cameras at the Peterson estate. At the end of the hearing, Judge Bennett issued a temporary injunction preventing any construction in the disputed area until the case was resolved. It was a small victory, but the Petersons knew that the real battle was just beginning. That evening, as the brothers shared a coffee on the veranda of the family home, Henry noticed movement near the electric fence. "Jack, look at that," he whispered, pointing to two figures moving in the shadows. Approaching cautiously, they discovered workers removing the private property Golden Plains HOA signs. One of them, seeing the Petersons, handed them an envelope before hurrying away. Inside was an anonymous note. "Not everyone in the HOA agrees with Ward. There are more documents. Look for Project Sunrise in the City Hall archives." The brothers exchanged glances. The mysterious message suggested that there was more at stake than a simple land dispute. The battle over the Peterson farm was turning into something bigger, a fight that could expose a corruption scheme that extended far beyond the boundaries of Lebanon. The morning after discovering the mysterious note, Jack and Henry arrived early at Lebanon City Hall. The 1930s Art Deco building still retained its original grandeur, but the brothers barely noticed the architecture, focused on their mission to find information about Project Sunrise. "Good morning, Mrs. Henderson." Jack greeted the elderly secretary he had known since he was a child. "We need to consult some municipal archives." Mrs. Henderson adjusted her half-moon glasses. "You need a permit to—" Actually, Henry interrupted smoothly, placing a copy of Judge Bennett's court order on the counter. "This gives us access to records related to the Golden Plains HOA in its developments." As Mrs. Henderson examined the document, Marion Foster entered the lobby. "Sorry I'm late. I had an interesting meeting with a former Matthews Enterprises employee." In a municipal archive, among piles of dusty documents, the team began their search. Marion methodically organized the boxes by date, while Jack and Henry combed through zoning records and environmental permits. "Here," exclaimed Marion after 2 hours of searching. "Project Sunrise, dated 3 years ago. It's a complete master plan for—" "My God." The brothers approached the map that Marion was unfolding on the table. It was an extensive development project that encompassed not only the Peterson farm, but practically the entire rural area south of Lebanon. The plan included luxury condominiums, a shopping center, and even a golf course. "Look at the submission date," Jack pointed out. It was before the HOA even existed. Elizabeth Warren and George Matthews had it all planned out. Henry found more related documents. "There's more. They bought strategic land through front companies. The HOA was just the last piece of the puzzle." The sound of heels on the marble floor made the three of them turn around. Elizabeth Warren was standing at the entrance to the archive, her face a mask of false concern. "What a coincidence to find you here," she said, approaching. "I hope you're finding everything you need." Marion positioned herself discreetly between Elizabeth and the documents. "We certainly are, Mrs. Warren, including some very interesting information about Project Sunrise." Elizabeth's smile faltered for a moment. "Oh, that old abandoned project. I don't know why they still keep those files." "Abandoned?" questioned Henry. "Then why has Matthews Enterprises bought 3 more properties in the area bounded by the project in the last 6 months?" Before Elizabeth could answer, her phone rang. She turned away quickly, but not before casting a worried glance at the documents on display. That afternoon, while they were organizing the evidence in Marion's office, they received an unexpected visitor. Michael Turner, an official from the Urban Planning Department, looked nervous as he entered the room. "I saw you in the archive today," he said, closing the door. "There's something you need to know. The Sunrise project was never really abandoned. Elizabeth Warren and George Matthews bribed officials to keep the original records hidden." Marion picked up her tape recorder. "Mr. Turner, would you be willing to make an official statement?" "That's why I'm here," he replied, his hand shaking slightly. "I can't take part in this anymore. They're destroying entire families." Michael revealed an elaborate corruption scheme involving alterations to official maps, irregular zoning approvals, and pressure on small homeowners. The HOA was just the public face of a much larger operation. While driving back to the farm, Jack and Henry were discussing their next course of action when they noticed unusual movement on the property. 3 black SUVs were parked near the electric fence, and men in suits were taking measurements of the land. "Hey," shouted Henry, accelerating the truck. "You don't have authorization to be here." George Matthews emerged from one of the vehicles, adjusting his Italian suit. "Actually, we do. We just filed a restraining order. While the process is going on, we have the right to carry out preliminary studies." Jack felt his blood boil. "Preliminary studies? You're violating a restraining order. Business is business." Mr. Peterson Matthews smiled coldly. "Lebanon is growing. You can either be part of the future or be run over by it." At that moment, several pickup trucks appeared on the road. Clara Rodriguez was leading a group of local farmers, all determined to defend the Peterson property. "Not here," Matthews said Clara firmly. "Not this time." The developer observed the growing crowd of farmers, and after a moment of tension, gestured for his men to back off. "This isn't over, Peterson," he warned as he got into his vehicle. After the invaders left, the neighbors gathered on the Petersons' porch. Robert Wilson, the elderly man who had lost his land to the HOA, shared more details about how Warren and Matthews operated. "They have people inside City Hall, the land registry, even in the water department," he revealed. "It's a web of corruption that goes far beyond Lebanon." Marion, who had arrived during the confusion, was furiously taking notes. "With Mr. Turner's testimony and this new evidence, we can expand the case. This is no longer just about the Peterson farm, it's about exposing a criminal scheme." Amanda, Jack's daughter, sent a message with more findings from her university research. Matthews Enterprises was connected to similar projects in 3 other counties, always using HOAs as a front for their operations. As the sun set over the wheat fields, Jack watched the neighbors gathered on their property, sharing stories and planning resistance strategies. The fight for the Peterson farm had turned into something bigger, a battle for the soul of the entire rural community of Lebanon. A phone call at 3 in the morning rarely brings good news. Jack Peterson was startled awake by the insistent ringing of his cell phone. It was Michael Turner, the city planning official, who had been willing to testify against Elizabeth Warren and George Matthews. "They know," said Turner, his voice shaking. "Someone leaked that I talked to you. I just found my desk turned over in the office and my computer hacked." Jack sat up in bed, instantly alert. "Are you safe for the moment?" "But there's more, Peterson. A lot more. I need to show you something, but it can't be over the phone. Meet me at Café Miller in an hour." Café Miller, a 24-hour diner on the outskirts of Lebanon, was practically empty when Jack arrived. Henry had insisted on accompanying him, and Marion Foster also showed up carrying her usual folder of documents. Michael Turner was already waiting for them at a table at the back, his pale face illuminated by the fluorescent light. On the table, a USB stick and a pile of documents. "Project Sunrise isn't just about Lebanon," Turner began, his voice low and urgent. "It's part of a statewide scheme. Matthews has connections to politicians in Topeka. They're using HOAs all over Kansas to force small landowners to sell their land." Marion examined the documents Turner had brought. "That explains why the state authorities have been ignoring the reports." "But why now? Why the rush?" "Water," Turner replied. "The whole scheme is linked to water rights. The Ogallala Aquifer is drying up in some regions, but there are studies showing that the Lebanon area still has significant reserves. Whoever controls the land controls the water." A noise at the entrance to the cafe made everyone turn sharply, but it was only a waitress knocking over a tray. Turner continued, his hands shaking as he pointed to a map. "Elizabeth Warren isn't just the president of the HOA. She represents a consortium of international investors. The plan is to create a network of gated communities controlling the main access points to the aquifer." Jack felt his stomach sink. The Peterson farm was located over one of the most water-rich areas in the region. It was no coincidence that the electric fence had been installed in that very part of the property. "We need to act fast," said Marion, organizing the documents. "With this evidence we can—" The sound of breaking glass interrupted her speech. A stone crashed through the cafe window, followed by a flaming object. Within seconds, curtains and tables were on fire. "Everybody out," shouted Henry, pulling Turner along while Jack helped Marion collect the documents. The fire spread quickly, but they managed to escape through the back door. In the parking lot, they saw two masked men getting into a black car, which sped off. Turner was panicking. "They're gonna kill me," he muttered repeatedly. "I need to get out of town." Marion took control of the situation. "I have a friend in Wichita who could take you in. Jack, take him there now. Henry and I will go to the police." As they drove through the early morning darkness, Jack watched Turner in the passenger seat, clutching his briefcase like a life jacket. The man had risked everything to expose the truth. Back in Lebanon, news of the cafe fire spread quickly. Elizabeth Warren made a point of appearing on the scene, expressing her concern about the growing violence in the city. "That's why we need planned development," she declared to local reporters, "to keep our communities safe and civilized." But the tide was beginning to turn. Clara Rodriguez organized an emergency meeting with other landowners at the local church. Robert Wilson brought in more former homeowners willing to testify about the HOA's tactics. The community was coming together. Amanda, Jack's daughter, arrived by surprise from the university with a group of environmental law students. "We found legal precedents, Dad," she said, spreading similar cases out on the kitchen table. "In Colorado and Nebraska, other communities have faced similar attempts to monopolize water resources." Matthews Enterprises responded with a massive legal offensive, filing lawsuits against the Petersons for defamation and interference with business. George Matthews personally showed up at the farm with a new offer. $5 million, he said, sitting on the Peterson porch. "More than double the market value. Get it over with now, before things get even nastier." Jack looked at the field where his great-grandfather had planted the first wheat, at the barn his father had rebuilt after the tornado of 1985, at the trees under which his children had played. "Some things are priceless, Matthews," he replied simply. "This land is not for sale. Not for any money." The developers smiled humorlessly. "Everyone has a price, Peterson. It's just a question of how hard you push." That evening, as the community gathered again at the Peterson farm to discuss the next steps, Jack received a message from Turner, already safe in Wichita. "More people are willing to talk. The truth is coming out." The battle was far from over, but for the first time since the electric fence appeared, the Petersons felt they were no longer alone. The fight for their land had turned into something bigger, a battle for Lebanon's very soul and the resources that sustained the entire region. Dawn in Lebanon brought with it a charged atmosphere. Dark clouds hung over the Peterson farm as a caravan of vehicles approached along the dirt road. In front of the property, more than 50 local farmers formed a line of resistance, their determined faces reflecting the seriousness of the moment. "They're coming in droves," observed Henry, adjusting his worn hat as he watched through binoculars. George Matthews had mobilized a full team: lawyers, surveyors, private security guards, and even a construction crew. Jack remained silent, recalling the conversation he'd had with Marion the night before. The evidence provided by Turner had been crucial in getting them an emergency hearing with Judge Bennett scheduled for that afternoon. But Matthews had apparently decided to force the situation before then. Elizabeth Warren stepped out of her luxury SUV, her impeccable blazer contrasting with the dust of the country road. Her usual smile was absent, replaced by an expression of barely concealed irritation at the sight of the crowd of farmers. "This is intimidation," she shouted, approaching the line of resistance. "You're preventing an authorized legal operation." Clara Rodriguez stepped forward, holding up a tablet. "Legal?" Then explained this, Mrs. Warren. She played a video. It was a security recording showing Elizabeth and Matthews discussing Project Sunrise in a Topeka restaurant 2 years before the HOA was formed. Elizabeth's face visibly paled. George Matthews, sensing the situation, tried to take control. "We don't have time for this. Get to work," he ordered the construction crew. Just then, 3 state police vehicles appeared on the road, followed by an official FBI car. Marion Foster emerged from one of the vehicles accompanied by federal agents. George Matthews announced one of the agents, "We have a federal warrant for the seizure of documents related to the Sunrise Project and the operations of Matthews Enterprises in the state of Kansas." The ensuing confusion was interrupted by the sound of helicopters. 3 local TV crews were flying over the property, broadcasting the confrontation live. Amanda Peterson had alerted the press, turning the Petersons' private battle into a public spectacle. "It's over, Elizabeth," said Jack, approaching Warren. Turner wasn't alone. 3 more city officials presented evidence to the FBI this morning. Warren and Matthews' carefully constructed empire was beginning to crumble. In the following weeks, investigations revealed a scheme that stretched across 3 states, involving manipulation of property titles, bribery of public officials, and fraud in environmental licensing. The hearing with Judge Bennett turned into a historic session for Lebanon. The courtroom was packed when Marion presented the definitive evidence documents, showing that the Golden Plains HOA had been created specifically to facilitate the forced acquisition of properties over the Ogallala Aquifer. "This court orders the immediate dissolution of the Golden Plains HOA," declared Judge Bennett, "and orders a full investigation into all real estate transactions conducted under its management." The Peterson victory inspired a wave of similar lawsuits across the state. Other rural communities began to question the practices of their HOAs, and state legislation was proposed to limit the powers of these associations over agricultural properties. Elizabeth Warren faced federal charges of fraud and conspiracy. George Matthews fled to Mexico, but was extradited months later. The Aquifer scam was exposed in a series of investigative reports that won a Pulitzer Prize. One fall afternoon 6 months after the initial confrontation, the community gathered at the Peterson farm to celebrate. The electric fence had been removed, and where the HOA sign once stood, a memorial was installed in honor of those who defended our land. Michael Turner, now protected by the Witness program, sent a message: "You didn't just save a farm. You saved the future of Lebanon." Robert Wilson, sitting on the Petersons' porch with other neighbors, raised his glass in a toast to the land that unites us and to the courage that keeps us on it. The Petersons' victory represented more than the preservation of a family property. It became a symbol of resistance against corporate greed and a reminder of the power of community unity. Lebanon's fertile land would continue to feed future generations, free from the threat of predatory development. Jack and Henry, watching the sun set over their wheat fields, knew that the struggle for land never really ended. But now they had something more valuable than land titles. They had a strengthened community ready to face whatever challenges the future brought. Amanda decided to postpone her career plans in corporate law to set up a law firm in Lebanon specializing in defending small rural landowners. "Some battles are worth more than money," she told her father. The Peterson farm remained what it had always been, not just a piece of land, but a living testimony that some things are priceless: the history of a family, the strength of a community, and the determination of ordinary people to stand up for what is right. When new developers began to survey the area in the following years, they found a community transformed and united. Lebanon was no longer easy prey for predatory real estate schemes. It was an example of how the preservation of rural traditions and development could coexist as long as they were based on mutual respect and justice. The Peterson story became a local legend passed down from generation to generation as a reminder that some battles are worth fighting no matter the cost. And on summer evenings, when the wind blew gently over the wheat fields, you could feel the echo of those who came before, protecting the land they loved so much.